The air was thick with humidity, the scent of stagnant water rising from the swamp as the sun began to dip behind a tangle of trees. It was a landscape of shadows, where the wild had claimed its dominion. Tall reeds swayed gently in the breeze, but under the surface something stirred. A faint sound broke the silence, the desperate whimper of a dog. In the heart of this isolated marshland, a German shepherd was trapped. Its fur was matted with mud, and its paws scraped against the rotting wood of an old boat, half submerged in the water. The dog, shivering, was tethered to the vessel by a rusted chain, its eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. It had been left here, abandoned, with no one to care for it. But despite the dire situation, there was a flicker of something else in the dog's demeanor, something that suggested loyalty, something that spoke of duty even in this forsaken place. Not far off, a figure emerged from the thick trees. He was a man of considerable age, his posture bent by years of service and solitude. Retired now, but the discipline in his stance and the sharpness in his eyes hadn't faded with time. Jack Thornton, once a Navy SEAL, had found solace in the quiet stretches of the wilderness. He had come here to fish, to reconnect with a world that seemed to offer less and less peace every year. But instead, it was the cries of a dog that pierced the evening stillness. The sound tugged at something deep within him, something he hadn't realized he still carried a sense of duty. His heart raced as he recognized the helplessness in the dog's voice. Without a second thought, he dropped his gear and began moving toward the sound, his boots crunching the underbrush beneath him. As he reached the water's edge, Jack saw the dog, its fur soaked, its eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and unwavering obedience. It was like looking into a mirror of his own past, a reflection of himself in another form. The dog was clearly suffering, but there was also a deep sense of loyalty in its eyes. It wasn't simply waiting for rescue. No, it had been left behind. Trapped, but still bound to its post, perhaps out of duty, perhaps out of love. Jack's heart tightened. He had seen soldiers like this, driven by a sense of duty, even in the face of impossible odds. But this wasn't a soldier. This was a dog, a creature who had lived through hell and yet still carried the weight of loyalty. Jack knew in that moment that this was a soul that needed help, but also one that could give him something he'd lost long ago. He stepped closer to the boat, slowly, careful not to startle the animal. The dog's ears twitched, its body tense, but it made no attempt to move. Jack crouched down, his voice soft but firm, like he would address a soldier. "Hey boy," he said. "It's all right. You're safe now." For a moment, the dog only stared at him, its body quivering in the cold. Then, with a shaky movement, it shifted slightly, its eyes still not leaving Jack. The connection was instant. Jack didn't need to know the dog's history. He knew loyalty when he saw it. Jack's hands moved to the chain, and with a few quick movements, he managed to free the dog from its restraints. The dog didn't run, didn't jump into the water in frantic escape. Instead, it remained there, its gaze never leaving Jack, as if it was still waiting for orders, still holding on to some form of duty. "Come on, boy. You're free," Jack said, his voice more strained now. There was something about the dog's reluctance to leave that made his chest tighten. It wasn't just waiting for release, it was waiting for permission, for something more. But Jack didn't push it. He simply sat there next to the dog, letting the silence stretch out between them. Eventually, the dog turned its head toward him, its eyes softening slightly. With a quiet growl, the dog stepped down from the boat and into the mud, its tail low but moving slowly. "All right, let's get you out of here," Jack murmured, standing up and extending his hand. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment it felt like the beginning of something bigger, something Jack had long forgotten. The dog, after a moment of hesitation, took a step forward, its body still stiff with caution, but its eyes now trusting Jack's presence. Jack felt a pang in his chest. This wasn't just any dog. This was a warrior, and he wasn't alone. The rescue was just the beginning, but both the man and the dog knew something had shifted. Neither of them was the same anymore. Jack had saved the dog, but in doing so, he had found something that he had lost long ago, a reason to keep going. Jack led the dog slowly through the dense swamp, his hand lightly resting on its back. The dog, though still hesitant and reserved, followed closely behind. There was an odd tension in the air, as though both of them were tiptoeing around something unspoken. The veteran was used to following orders, to pushing forward despite the doubts that always whispered in the back of his mind. But this felt different. The dog's movements were cautious, every step calculated, as if still tethered to some invisible responsibility. Jack could feel the weight of the animal's past lingering in the air. It wasn't just that the dog had been abandoned, it was the loyalty it had shown despite the cruelty it had faced. Jack knew that look. He'd seen it in soldiers who had stayed with their units, despite being broken down by years of combat. It was the kind of loyalty that didn't ask for recognition, that didn't wait for a reward. It just existed quietly, steadily. As they made their way toward the truck, the dog stopped suddenly. Jack, who had been talking softly to it, asking the kind of calming questions he would have asked a fellow soldier, halted as well. He looked down, surprised to see the dog's eyes fixed on something in the distance. It wasn't a threat, nor was it fear. No, it was something else, something Jack couldn't quite understand. "Hey, what is it?" Jack asked, kneeling down to meet the dog's gaze. The dog's posture was rigid, its tail barely moving. Jack's gut twisted with the realization. The dog wasn't acting out of fear or distress. It was waiting for something. Perhaps it was waiting for orders, still stuck in the mindset that it had to remain in a state of readiness. "Come on, buddy. You're free now," Jack whispered, reaching out to gently pull the dog closer. But the dog resisted, tugging back, just slightly, looking back over its shoulder toward the swamp. It wasn't until Jack crouched lower, looking into the dog's eyes with understanding, that the truth began to dawn on him. This dog wasn't hesitant because of the swamp. It was hesitant because in its mind it was still on duty. It still believed it had a job to do, a post to hold. Its bond to its duty, its sense of responsibility, was so deeply ingrained that it couldn't simply let go. Not yet. Jack sighed, his hand coming to rest on the dog's head in a silent gesture of acknowledgement. He knew that look. It was the same look he'd seen on the faces of soldiers coming home, haunted by the question of whether their work was ever truly finished. The dog turned to him again, its eyes softening, as though it were finally beginning to trust that there was no mission, no duty anymore. For the first time since the rescue, the dog's body began to relax. Jack took that as a sign to move forward. "All right, pal. You're coming with me," Jack said softly, his voice carrying both authority and compassion. He stood and walked toward the truck, the dog now following at a steady pace behind him. There was no more resistance, no more hesitation. The bond had already started to form, but Jack knew it would take time and patience to truly understand what had brought this animal to the point it was at. As Jack opened the door to the truck, he patted the seat beside him. "Get in, boy," he murmured. The dog hesitated for a second, its eyes darting from Jack to the open door. With a quiet whine, it jumped into the truck, settling itself beside Jack, its body still tense but clearly grateful for the care. Jack climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The drive back to his cabin would be a quiet one, but Jack could feel that something inside him had shifted. The dog had been freed from its chain, but it was still bound to something far more powerful: its loyalty. Days passed in a quiet routine. Jack tended to his small cabin, and the dog, whom he had named Scout, settled in beside him. The dog, though, not initially a pet in the traditional sense, began to show subtle signs of affection. But it was clear from the way Scout followed Jack's every move that the bond was still evolving. Scout remained disciplined, sitting straight and watching Jack intently whenever he made a move. Jack started to realize that the dog wasn't just following him because of the food or the shelter. There was something deeper at play. The dog, like Jack, had been trained for something more. Scout was still looking for purpose, but there were moments too when Jack saw the dog show signs of something more profound, the scars of its past. Late one evening, Jack sat on the porch staring out at the forest, his thoughts lost in the sounds of nature. Scout had been restless for hours, pacing around the yard. Jack watched him closely, noticing how the dog stopped every few feet, raised, its head and listened intently. "Hey boy, what's going on?" Jack called softly. He knew that Scout had been through trauma, the kind of trauma that left invisible wounds. But what struck him most was how the dog seemed to be searching for something, still expecting a call, still anticipating orders. It wasn't the playful behavior of a regular dog. It was the vigilance of a soldier on high alert. Jack stood up slowly, moving towards Scout. The dog turned to face him, its eyes wide, and then, in a moment of vulnerability, Scout let out a soft, mournful whine, as though the years of abandonment and uncertainty had finally taken their toll. Jack's heart softened. He kneeled down beside Scout, rubbing his ears gently, trying to comfort the animal. "You're not alone anymore, Scout. I got you," Jack whispered. From that moment, Jack began to understand. Scout wasn't just a dog that had been abandoned. Scout was a creature that had been abandoned while still holding on to its duty, its sense of purpose. And now Jack had to help the dog let go of that burden. It would take time, but they both had time to heal. Each morning, Jack would take Scout on walks, allowing the dog to explore the woods at its own pace. Slowly, Scout began to show signs of playfulness, rolling in the grass, chasing after sticks and wagging his tail. Yet there was always a watchful glint in the dog's eyes, as though it was still unsure whether this freedom was permanent. Jack understood this, and he didn't rush it. Through every interaction, Jack gently coaxed Scout into a new kind of life, one where loyalty no longer had to mean pain or sacrifice. As the days passed, Scout learned to trust again, though it was clear that the scars of his past would take longer to heal. And for Jack, every small victory with Scout was a victory for himself too. He wasn't just helping Scout find peace, he was rediscovering his own. The turning point came unexpectedly. One quiet afternoon, Jack was working on repairs to the cabin when he heard a voice calling from the road. A woman appeared on the driveway, her face frantic, her body shaking with fear. "My son," she gasped. "He's wandered into the woods. He's not answering his phone and I can't find him anywhere. Can you help me?" Without hesitation, Jack grabbed his jacket and turned to Scout, who had been resting by the door. The dog's ears perked up as if understanding the gravity of the situation. For the first time, Jack saw Scout's posture shift, no longer hesitant or unsure, but alert and focused. "This way," Jack called to the woman. And Scout, tail straight and purposeful, followed close behind. The trio entered the woods, Jack leading the way with Scout trailing behind. As the minutes passed, the woman's panic grew. "What if something happened to him?" she cried. Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to Scout. The dog was leading now, its nose to the ground, every step filled with certainty. Jack felt a surge of hope. Scout was finally finding his purpose again. The dog had rediscovered its duty, and this time, it wasn't as a soldier on a battlefield. It was as a protector, a loyal companion. The forest was dense and thick, the trees standing like silent sentinels, their towering presence casting long shadows over the trail. Jack led the way, but it was Scout who seemed to take charge. The dog's nose was working overtime, every movement deliberate, every scent a potential clue. Jack noticed how the dog moved with purpose, no longer uncertain or timid. Scout's steps were sure, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings, his posture that of a soldier on a mission. It was clear that this was the dog's way of feeling useful again, of becoming the protector he had been trained to be. The woman, clutching her jacket tightly around her, stayed close to Jack, her eyes darting nervously from the trees to the dog. "Do you think he's all right?" she asked, her voice shaky. Jack gave a reassuring smile, even though part of him wasn't sure. He'd seen many things in his life, but a missing child in the woods, that was a new kind of fear. He kept his eyes on Scout, knowing that the dog's instincts were sharp. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity, but then a soft growl broke the silence. Scout paused, his ears flicking, then bolted forward into the underbrush. "Scout, wait!" Jack called, but the dog was already moving with the speed and precision of an animal who knew exactly what it was doing. Jack and the woman rushed to catch up, their hearts pounding in their chests. Then they saw him, a young boy, no older than 10, huddled under a thick tree. His face was streaked with dirt, and he appeared terrified, but unharmed. He looked up at the sound of footsteps, his wide eyes locking with Jack's. "Are you all right?" Jack asked gently, kneeling beside him. The boy nodded, his lip trembling. "I was lost. I tried to find my way back, but I couldn't." Before Jack could respond, Scout came to a halt beside the boy, sitting down with an air of authority, his eyes steady, protective. The boy slowly reached out and touched Scout's head, and the dog didn't flinch. Instead, it leaned into the touch, its tail wagging slightly. "He saved me," the boy whispered, his voice full of awe. Jack gave the dog a soft, almost imperceptible nod. The bond between them had solidified in that moment. Scout had not only found his purpose again, he had fulfilled it. This was more than just loyalty to Jack. It was loyalty to something larger than himself. This was a return to the duty he had once known, now reborn in a way that allowed him to save a life. The woman, who had been standing frozen in disbelief, took a step forward, her eyes welling with tears. "Thank you," she said to Jack, her voice full of gratitude. She knelt down to her son, wrapping him in a tight embrace. Jack stood and placed a hand on Scout's back, rubbing it gently. The dog looked up at him, its eyes filled with quiet understanding. They were both different now, the mission, the duty, the loyalty. It wasn't the same as it had been before, but it was still there. Scout had found a new role in the world, and Jack had found a companion who would never leave his side. "Let's get you both home," Jack said, standing and offering his hand to the boy. Scout moved ahead, leading the way, confident and calm. Jack followed, and the woman and her son walked behind him, the tension that had held them in its grip slowly fading. The journey back to the cabin was slower this time. The rush of the rescue had passed, and with it a strange calmness settled over the group. The woman had thanked Jack and Scout repeatedly, but Jack merely nodded, his thoughts drifting back to the events of the day. When they finally reached the cabin, the woman's son was safe, and Scout had proven his worth in a way Jack hadn't anticipated. The dog had saved a life not with force, but with a quiet sense of purpose and loyalty. The dog had found his redemption in a moment of real need. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack and Scout sat together on the porch, watching the sky turn from pink to gold. The dog rested his head on Jack's leg, and for a while there was nothing but the sound of crickets and the gentle rustle of the wind in the trees. Jack stroked Scout's fur, his hand moving slowly, rhythmically. He didn't need to say anything. The silence between them was enough. In that quiet, Jack realized that the healing process wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about learning to live with the scars, to embrace the loyalty that had never faded, and to let go of the past, even as it continued to shape them. Scout had saved a life that day, but in many ways, it was Jack who had been saved. Through the dog's loyalty, Jack had learned to let go of his own burdens, the ones that had been weighing on him for so long. The dog had healed, but so had Jack. They had both found a new purpose, a new bond, one that went beyond duty and survival. Over the next few weeks, Jack and Scout settled into a new rhythm. The dog, once a soldier bound by duty, had become a companion, a friend. Jack no longer had to coax him into play or teach him to relax. Slowly, Scout found his place in the world, no longer looking for orders or a mission. He had found peace. Jack, too, had found a kind of peace. His days no longer felt empty, and the quiet loneliness that had plagued him for so long had been replaced by the presence of Scout. They were two souls who had found each other, each scarred by the past, but healing together. In the mornings, Jack would take Scout out on the trail. They had become a team, not just man and dog, but partners. Jack would stop sometimes and look down at Scout, noticing how the dog's eyes would meet his, always full of trust, always ready. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Jack spoke softly to Scout, though he wasn't really sure if the dog could understand. "You've given me something I didn't know I needed," he said. "You're more than just a dog, Scout. You're a part of me now." Scout wagged his tail in response, leaning into Jack's side. It was then that Jack realized that in saving Scout, he hadn't just given the dog a new life. Scout had given him one in return. They had saved each other, bonded in ways that words could never fully explain. As the fire crackled, the night air cool and peaceful around them, Jack and Scout knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, not as a soldier and his dog, but as two souls bound by loyalty, love, and redemption. The story of Jack and Scout wasn't just a story of rescue. It was a story of healing, of finding redemption in the places where we least expect it. The loyalty that had once been a burden became the foundation of a bond that transcended the scars of the past. Through Scout, Jack found not just a companion, but a partner in the journey of life. And for Scout, it was more than just freedom. It was a chance to lay down his past and build a future not defined by duty, but by love. In the end, their story wasn't about the heroic acts they performed, but about the quiet moments of companionship, the simple joy of sharing a life of healing together and of learning to trust again. Jack and Scout weren't just man and dog. They were a living testament to the power of loyalty, the resilience of the heart, and the healing that can only come from true unconditional love. Their journey had only just begun, but one thing was clear. Together they would face whatever came next side by side. As the story of Jack and Scout comes to a close, we're reminded that loyalty, love, and redemption are universal themes that transcend not just species, but everything that makes us human. The journey of healing, growth, and trust is one that can inspire us all to be better, to offer more, and to cherish the bonds that we form, no matter how unlikely they might seem. If you've been moved by the story of Jack and Scout, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share this story with someone who could use a reminder of the power of loyalty and healing. Comment below and let us know how you believe animals and humans can save each other in unexpected ways. Subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories, real-life rescues, and tales of transformation. Don't forget to like this video if it touched your heart. Remember, the power of love and loyalty is something we can all carry with us every day. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Stay loyal, stay kind.